But you did suggest, sir, that the fights really between the executive and the judiciary and parliament's really been quite staid and out of it. But we'll come back to that. Dr. Justice Muralidhar.
Good evening to everyone. I thank the Justice Ajay Kumar Tripathi Foundation, his family for inviting me here. It's a pleasure speaking before such a distinguished audience comprising of judges who I deeply respect and some of whom have been my dear colleagues. I must say at the outset, it's a big relief not having to decide which of these two arguments are right. The topic was continues to be an interesting one. But one of the first questions that crossed my mind when I heard both the eminent speakers was how much do we value democracy? I think that's a very, very important question that we need to answer. Because if you start looking inwards, let's start with the unit of a family and ask ourselves how democratic are we within our families. I'm sure many women in this audience will immediately have the answer, and many men will have doubts. Then we take the larger unit of society, community, and you keep expanding the circle. You will begin to realize how less and less democratic we are within our personal spheres. So when Ambedkar talked of constitutional morality, he meant practicing constitutional values. And he meant that bureaucrats, he imagined that people administering power would practice constitutional values when they wielded power. So one of the first questions we need to ask ourselves when we talk of the different organs of state is how democratic are these organs of state? Let's take the parliament. How democratic is the parliament itself? How often do you have walkouts by an opposition, whether it's in parliament or state legislatures? How often do you have ruckus created in parliament where you shout down the other voice? How often do you have walking across the floor, the Ayaram Gayaram phenomenon, which subverts the very notion of popular mandate through elections? So I think over the last 75 years, we've seen a steady erosion. I'd agree with Pavan Ji. We've seen a steady erosion. And I agree with Mahesh on the impracticality of this ideal. Because one of the major organs of state, which is the parliament and which Shahrukh says has not been talked enough about, is itself undemocratic. I think this is something that we need to understand. We'll turn to the executive. The phenomenon, I've been a Chief Justice of Orissa for 2.5 years. I can vouch for the power of what is called the Chief Minister's Office. CMO. The CMO model of governance has become very popular. Pavanji's dear former colleague very much believed in a CMO style of functioning. I'm talking of Nitish Ji. Gujarat. Why are we touting the Gujarat model of governance? Gujarat is a classic example of 20 years of CMO-driven government. And now it's become a PMO. So today when we talk in circles, even in judicial circles, file PMO tak pahunch gaya hai. Which means you're now, assured of the next steps. Because it's become a power center. Concentration of all power in just that one office. An office of the head of the executive supported by trusted bureaucrats. This has become the model of functioning. So steadily, I think Pavanji must have watched, I don't know how many cabinets and how many governments, both as a bureaucrat and then as a politician, and Mahesh must have been defending many of them. We've seen that this cabinet is just a naam ke vaste cabinet. Very often amongst judges we ask ourselves, Why? Who's the law minister today? Because the law minister has not become an important player at all in judicial appointments. We know that. So the shifting of the balance of power even within the organs is so palpable. So there's a deep concentration of power in one or two individuals, even within these organs of state. And then talk of the judiciary. I would say it is among the most, least democratic when functioning within itself. Master of the roster. This has all come out now in the public domain, right? You don't know which case you're going to decide the next morning. That morning, you will be told, today you are sitting with that judge. But I've read all the files of my roster yesterday night. Sorry, one judge is not available. You have to go and sit in that court. So you are not in control of what you decide. And you're not in control of how judicial business is distributed. So, and you'd be surprised to know that although we function as committees, ultimately the administrative power, whether it's in the High Court or the Supreme Court, vests in one individual, the Chief Justice. So the way we've modeled our institutions is essentially non-democratic. With the 73rd, 74th, we said let's decentralize legislative power. Let's have urban bodies and Panchayat Raj institutions. Now you'll ask, how democratic are those institutions? Then you'll immediately know the answer. Then you say, chalo, let's leave aside all these formal institutions that have been recognized in Parliament. Let's talk of non-formal institutions, the parallel institutions. Then I'll ask you, just 40 kilometers from here in Sonipat, there is a Khap Panchayat. How democratic is that Khap Panchayat? All of you know that answer. I come from Tamil Nadu, there's something called Katta Panchayat. I know it's non-democratic. So we've not really understood, much less internalized, values of democracy. So we hold forth on fraternity, liberty, equality, but we don't internalize. When I see the functioning of Parliament, I see the body language of the speaker when the Prime Minister enters, I feel worried. I see the body language of the chairperson of the Rajya Sabha when the Prime Minister enters, I feel a bit worried. See, it's a tacit acknowledgement that power vests in one individual. And it is not a mere coincidence. It's a very deliberate, structured thing. It's very deliberate, structured. On your TV screens, if you see how the camera is positioned, who features in that? You know, the late lamented J. Jayalalitha. In the entire dais, there'll be one chair. Mahesh, were you her lawyer? Even you wouldn't be allowed to share the dais with her. One chair. I'm going to tell you who the boss is. So if we can't change that culture, you can call it patriarchy, you can call it feudalism, you can call it by any name. In our personal spheres, we don't change it. Actually, we don't even expect it in the larger sphere. So I think there's a very deep soul searching that has to happen as to what do we want to see in these institutions. If we talk of separation of powers, it won't be effective unless these institutions are democratic, these institutions wield their powers responsibly. An irresponsible wielding of power or a failure to wield the power will defeat the very purposes of this whole constitutional structure we have. Pavanji talked about, Maheshji talked about it, organs of state, co-equal powers, checks and balances. It won't work. When preparing for this lecture, I said, okay, which are those major inflection points? All right. I picked up Keshavananda Bharati. Why is Keshavananda Bharati so important? First time the judiciary is putting a check on powers of parliament. A very important check. A brute majority in parliament can simply not say, from tomorrow, no fundamental rights. We'll rewrite the constitution, take out fundamental rights altogether. That chapter goes. Cannot. Why? There is something very basic. We call that framework, right? On which you build an edifice. That very framework, which we called as basic structure, 13 wise men of the judiciary said, of course, by a split majority, that's another story for another day, that we should not alter that basic framework, basic structure. So major inflection point is Keshavananda Bharati. Then we come to S.R. Bommai. President can impose president's rule, throw out elected governments, and Shahrukh is lifting her mic, so I have to stop.
How
So-
I'd like to interrupt the judge.
Yeah. So Bommai, S.R. Bommai, I mean, many of us are here in the room. For us, it is all something that we've studied very often. Very major point. We said Parliament is not so powerful that, executive is not so powerful that it can, bypass the Parliament and bypass the courts. So we will judicially review a presidential decision, presidential order. You can impose a president's rule, but you will have to get it ratified by Parliament. And some of us may be aghast to know that we followed the Pakistan Supreme Court's precedent for this. We have to learn from any source. Mahesh mentioned judges appointing judges. Judges thought they were appointing judges. Judges didn't realize when files enter the PMO what might happen.
Now don't bring your personal experience.
No, Mahesh, the more serious note is this. See, we have a certain idea of what are checks and balances, how we should wrest back power, how we don't trust the other organs of state. But the way it works out is very different, and you're very right in that. In practical terms, the way it works out is very, very, very different. It doesn't work out the way we want it to work out. Then another major inflection point was impeachment of judges, the check that the legislature has on the judiciary. But a party in power can simply abstain from voting and defeat that whole motion of impeachment. So what parties in power might do, how en masse they might resign, how en masse they may walk across. The number of Biharis in this room will know that you wake up one morning, go and vote for a certain party and for a certain chief minister. 1 year later, no, the chief minister is the same, party has changed. So we have ways of actually subverting. Our scheme may be fine, but we have remarkable ways of subverting all of those schemes. And there are many other inflection points that I don't want to take up now all your time about. I'll use that for our exchange. But I think the broad point I'm trying to make is this: unless our organs, and in these organs I will include the Election Commission, the media, the Right to Information commissioners, they all, if they worked exactly the way they are expected to work, we will be a far better democracy and a far better India. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.